Spruce trees are Christmas trees, so you'd think you would recognize them, but there are some lookalikes like the pine tree, the yew tree, and a fir tree. The yew is actually a toxic lookalike, so you want to stay away from that tree. So some unique features you can look at to make sure you're looking at a spruce tree are the needles. They won't be longer than 1 inch. They actually grow in a square if you take a cross section, so this helps them to roll in your fingers. Spruce twigs are shaped like a bottle brush, and they're almost coming out of the branch from all directions. So they're fanning out from this branch or this twig, and they're connected by these little pegs that are like bark. And when the needle comes off, the peg remains on the branch or on the twig. Spruce trees will have these buds from fall to the spring, these papery husk buds. And in the spring, new growth will emerge from these. A new branch will grow from this papery sheath. These are called spruce tips, and they're highly prized by foragers. They're light green, they're very tender, and they have all these needles tightly packed together. They're soft and feathery, and they can be used for all sorts of culinary uses. Then we have the cones, which are elongated compared to other coniferous cones. Coniferous means having cones. So there's deciduous trees and there's coniferous, which usually keep their needles in the winter, and these trees have cones on them. And they have these scales on them. These scales you can peel off and they're very thin. Again, you can look for these pine cones on the bottom below the spruce or evidence of them, because animals like to pull them apart and eat them, or they fall apart, and you'll see at very least the inner stems of these cones for years to come. And like pine trees, the bark on a spruce tree is peely and it flakes off in these chunks. Now, how this differs from things like white pine, pine trees usually have their needles coming off in a cluster off of the branch, and they're usually wrapped around this cluster by a papery sheath or husk. And when you pull these needles off, they come off in a cluster, and they have that husk still on the needles attaching them together. They'll come in clusters of usually 5 or 2s, and 5 needles means it's an eastern white pine. Pine cones are different from spruce cones. They're more egg-shaped, and they're harder, and the scales are thicker. So these scales on the pine cones have this little spike on them. They almost look like they have a flower structure to them. When we're talking about pine cones, they're very symbolic of the pineal gland, or our third eye. Now the yew tree, the toxic lookalike, it has dark green needles. They're not really needles, they're more like leaves. It will look flat, where a spruce, it's fanning out and it's more 3D. The yew tree won't have cones on it. It has these little red berries that contain a big dark black pit or seed, and these can look like olives. Now you'll only really find yew trees in the forest, very short, very low down, about 1 foot or 2 off the ground. You'll also find them pretty commonly as ornamental trees. So in front of houses, businesses. The yew tree is toxic, so stay away from that tree. But if you do the other identification techniques, you won't mistake it for a spruce. Other harmless lookalikes of the spruce tree would be the fir tree, which is going to have longer needles. They're softer needles. Fir trees have this smooth bark, and you can see these pockets of resin, these almost blisters, and you can pop those blisters and this clear liquid resin will come out. It's highly medicinal. The hemlock trees typically have shorter needles than a spruce, and again, fir and hemlock, the needles come out the side of the branches, so it's more of a 2-dimensional structure, the branch. And a spruce tree, it will be a 3-dimensional structure. They're coming out all directions. There's also cedar trees, which do have resin in them, but you won't mistake those for a spruce tree. And the resin isn't very common. It doesn't come out as much like spruce, although I have picked some off the tree and eaten it and chewed it before, and it made very good gum. There's also the juniper tree, which is closely related to the cedar tree, and it has these berry-like cones. And the last tree in this evergreen family, this coniferous family actually, because this tree is not really evergreen, is the larch tree or the tamarack tree. This tree loses its needles in the fall. They'll turn yellow. You'll see these evergreen trees with yellow needles, and then they will lose them. So the tree will look dead in the winter with a bunch of cones on it, and then it will grow new needles in the spring. But this is what the needles look like on that. They also come out in clusters. Now that's how you identify a spruce tree.